Coal Mountain, 13 Moons. What's Charles Frazier's next book? We'll find out when we talk to him on North Carolina Bookwatch next.
Funding for North Carolina Bookwatch is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV, and by the North Carolina Humanities Council.
Welcome to North Carolina Bookwatch. I'm D.G. Martin, and my guest is Charles Frazier, the author of Nightwoods. Charles Frazier, are you getting used to being introduced as the author of Nightwoods?
No, not yet.
Well, of course, I guess first of all, we got to say that we're in your mountains. You grew up in the North Carolina mountains, and your first two books were set in the North Carolina mountains during the 19th century.
Yeah.
Nightwoods is also set in your mountains, but it's a little bit different.
Yeah, it's people getting cars and drive places. I was very interested in getting out of the 19th century for a while.
Well, speaking of the 19th century, we're talking in a building that is almost and maybe in the 19th century. Yeah. It's a borderline. This is Inman's Chapel. Yeah. And so if you drive by and see the new historical monument for Inman's Chapel, you raise the question, does Inman's Chapel have anything to do with Inman, who was the fictional hero of Coal Mountain?
Yeah, it does. 4 brothers, my great-great-grandfather among them, went off to the Civil War, and my great-great-grandfather was one of the 2 who came back alive. And so this area, this little chapel is kind of the core of that side of my family.
Well, it's a great privilege and a treat to be in Inman territory. But we're not talking about Coal Mountain today. We're talking about Nightwoods, your latest book. And I'm struck by the differences in length of Nightwoods. Did you set out to write a short book?
I did. Some of that was, I wanted a tight story, a quick story, moved forward with some momentum. 13 Moons especially was a very circular kind of book and covered almost a century. And this new one covers, 3-4 months. So I wanted it to be confined, number of characters, length of time. I wanted a book that you can pick up and just kind of just move through.
Quickly, well, this is not fair, but your reputation in some respects is like Thomas Wolfe in the sense that you write beautifully and you write a lot, and that writing a short book would be uncharacteristic. Was it hard? Was it a hard task to write a short book?
Well, when I first started saying I was going to do a short book, there were friends of mine who were laughing like, "Yeah, right." But it is considerably shorter. It was part of the challenge. I mean, just for me to keep interested, I wanted to change it up, and that moving out of the 19th century, working at a different pace was all part of that for me.
Tell us a little bit about your book. The book, we separate authors from those who are character-driven or plot-driven, and I thought yours had a lot of both. But how do you? Is it characters or is it plot?
Well, I hope it's got both, and it was interesting as a writer working on something where you really wanted to develop characters and also wanted a forward momentum, because that character development so often sends you back. So that kind of tension between the backward pull of character development and the forward momentum of plot development was interesting, just an interesting problem for me to work with, I thought.
How do you describe, without giving away the plot, how do you describe it?
Well, the book begins, it's set in about the early 60s. It's set on a isolated mountain lake at an old abandoned tourist lodge. And the main character is a young woman who's become the caretaker of the lodge. And she thinks she's very happy. She's a somewhat damaged person. She thinks she's happy living over there by herself with the compensations of nature and solitude and books and music, and to let the rest of the world just go on without her. And then the rest of the world arrives on her doorstep in the form of two very messed up children of her murdered sisters. And they,
How old are these children?
they're preschool, 6 maybe, let's say 6 to 7.
They're the thing that struck me about it is that they can't talk normally. Or they can't speak.
Yeah, they don't speak for much of the book.
Well, I interrupted you. So what happens?
Well, her life's turned upside down, and she's trying to understand what's wrong with these kids, what they need. She says at some point that she's going to step up and not be trash, that she's going to take care of these kids, and she's the caretaker of the lodge, and she's going to take care of these kids. But they kill roosters, they set fire to things, they're very difficult. And then at some point, the murderer of the sister arrives in town, at the town on the other side of the lake, looking for the kids because he thinks they have something that's his.
And so this becomes all of a sudden, from being sort of a novel about disturbed kids, which would be powerful enough, it becomes a murder mystery sort of, or a chase thriller.
Yeah, you've got this guy trying to get back what's his.
Well, I'd love to talk more about the story, but I also am engaged with the people who populate this, and you have told us a little bit about Luce, you call her,
Luce,
in the book, and the two disturbed children who become quite powerful characters. But there are other characters who are also fascinating. I ask you that, who's your favorite of the rest of the characters? There's a bad guy and a good guy. You like the bad guy or the good guy?
Well, there's a character, Stubblefield, who's Luce's age, who has inherited this lodge and some mountain land, and he's sort of never had a direction in life. You don't know exactly where his money's come from, but you know his family has some. A directionless guy, and he comes up to check out his inheritance, assuming he's just going to sell everything and go back to Florida. But he's very much attracted to Luce, and he's always loved the mountain landscape when he's come to visit his grandparents as a kid. So
Luce, in essence, is either Stubblefield is the guy's name,
yes,
and is his employee in a sense, or his tenant at will.
Yeah.
She's living there, but she doesn't respond to him as you would expect someone who's indebted to another person to respond.
She's a person with a pretty sharp edge to her, and the last thing she's interested in is some guy with a crush on her. She's got all she can handle with those two kids, and and her life's now, she's doesn't know how long she'll be able to live there or anything. So she's not so interested in romance.
Well, Stubblefield is I think, sort of, quote, the good guy. He's not perfect, but he's good. The bad guy is you've named, or is Bud.
Yeah.
And how did Bud come into being?
Well, when I just started this book, I just had this picture of a guy in a car on a mountain road at night, and just the lights of the dashboard reflecting on his face. And I had no idea who this guy was, what he had to do with this story and the other characters, and it took a year to place him, to figure out who this guy is in the car and what he has to do with his book.
Well, he's a critical figure in the book. How could you write the book without him being there?
Oh, the first year of working on a book for me is dithering around. It's just little sketches and paragraphs and characters that never make it, and it takes a year to figure out who the characters are and how it is that they relate to each other. For me. I mean, I've never been able, I've tried to work off an outline and I just can't.
Well, talking about Bud is a bad guy. And is it fair to, I mean, it's fair to identify him as someone for whom killing is not unusual?
He doesn't think of himself as a bad guy. He's impulsive and he misunderstands things and all that, but he does awful things to other people and finds justification for it. And, you know, I'm not going to do that again, and then he does. And he's a confused person. He's not a killing machine. You know, he's not one of these killers that's moving forward like a shark toward his targets. He just kind of, he wants some money, he wants to move on with his life, and he has a hard time finding a direction for that.
Well, how did you learn about such people?
You make them up.
Well, all right, that's good. I mean, I thought we were going to talk about that for 5 minutes, but Bud has an interesting side career. As you mentioned earlier, this is set right after 1960 in North Carolina, and in parts of North Carolina, bootlegging.
Yeah.
Now, what we think of bootlegging as building a still and making liquor, but there's another part of bootlegging.
Yeah, that's more moonshine.
Yeah.
Now, all of those western counties were dry at that time, so you know, you had to drive a couple hours in some cases to get any alcohol. So there was a thriving bootlegger business, which was really just a transportation business. You know, it was like go to Asheville, buy some liquor, drive back, mark it up 3 or 4 times, and sell it.
But you had Bud move into town and edge out the.
He takes over the local liquor business.
Now, did you just make that up, or did you hear when you were growing up? Did you hear stories of the?
Yeah, I mean, I knew bootleggers when I was a kid, and so I just kind of plugged him into that career path.
Well, one of the fascinating characters for me is the law enforcement officer, a little guy that you wouldn't want to mess with. Yeah. And isn't that, you call him Lit?
It's just a nickname because he's little. And he was possibly a ranger in World War II. And he's small, very quick, very strong. He uses his quickness and people's sense of him not being threatening because of his size to his advantage, and is really good in a fight.
Well, will you tell us, if you will, what role you had Lit play in this book?
He came into the book as to be a partner with Bud, that this killer and threat to Luce and the children, bootlegger, ends up with a relationship with the local law. And they're buddies and drive at night and drink and hang around.
So you construct the law enforcement responsibility in the hands of a guy who's a pretty good policeman. Yeah. But he has a friend who's in the bootleg business, and that overlaps so as to deny your heroine, Luce, the protection that she might have expected from the law.
And Bud doesn't just deal in alcohol. He has other substances that Lit's more interested in and has not had a supply of for a while.
You think of the illegal substances business, and now liquor is not so much illegal across western North Carolina now, but illegal are these drugs have been illegal for a long time. But back in the late 1950s, early 1960s, we didn't think of them as much. But your research shows that there were still a bunch of addicted people.
Yeah,
and consumers of illegal substances.
Yeah, and he was in some of the worst of the fighting of World War II, and started taking uppers for that, for long battles, and still likes the taste of that. And he's benzodrine inhalers to get some stimulant have been recently made illegal, and so he's looking for something new, for a new supply.
People, I'm sure, are asking you whether or not you're still writing historical fiction. The earlier two books, Cold Mountain and 13 Moons, obviously they're 19th century. Are the early 1960s now historical fiction, or is this contemporary fiction?
If you're my daughter's age, it's historical fiction. If you're my age, not so much.
Well, which leads me, clearly your first two books required enough research to write a PhD thesis in history. So what are the differences in researching and tying up the accuracy of the surroundings for a book that's set in something closer to modern times, where you really have some memories? Do you still have to? How much research do you have to do?
It was one of the things about Cold Mountain and 13 Moons that when I got stuck in the story, I could go over to Chapel Hill or Duke and spend a day or two or three in the libraries, and come back with refreshed and okay, here's some new material. Here's what I can do with it. This one, it was part of that challenge of changing things up, is that was not needed on this book. So it was all just sitting there looking at the screen. What could happen next? How do these people relate to each other?
Is it fair to say this was all from inside your memory and imagination?
Yeah, I probably didn't spend a day in the library on
well,
this
now,
book.
I don't want to argue with you about this, but you've got a lodge that's a central geographic feature of this, and some of your friends, in fact, you've said, some time ago, you said my next book's going to be about old resort lodges. So you must have done some research.
Well, for a book that never happened, I spent days over it in the North Carolina collection at Chapel Hill, reading about the old tourist inns in the mountains and the textile communities in the hotter lands.
A lot of people are going to ask when they read this quick-moving new book about whether or not you're a changed man, and that you're ready to write. What do you call it? You're ready to write popular. You're ready to write fiction for the market, popular fiction. What's going on in your mind?
This one, like I said, I wanted a change, and I had fun writing this. I had fun with a different pace, different materials, different everything. I can imagine going back to the 19th century again one day. I don't think it will be for the next book that I've already started working a little bit on. It'll be 20th century. But I just love the library work too much to never do it again.
Well, when you have your conversations with your agents and your publishers, it must be frustrating for them to say, we can sell a Charles Frazier book, but he just won't spit them out every year. And they want to be supportive, I'm sure, of you, but there must be a little pressure on you to say, Charles, can't you write these a little bit faster? Can't you?
I wish I could write them faster. My life would be easier if I could write them faster. But my process is slow and tedious. I do a lot of revisions, and I throw away a lot of material. As long as 13 Moons is, I probably threw away 150 pages. For that book, I've 100 pages for this book. So there's a lot of writing that just I may like it, but it doesn't. Either it impedes the flow of the plot or something. And toward the end of the process, to me, it's important to be pretty brutal in making those decisions. Not to be self-indulgent, to look at something, and even if you love it, there's one piece of this book that I love.
Well, tell us what it was.
It was the old lady Maddie character, and she's telling a story about the happiest day of her life.
I just missed asking you about Maddie, but this is the old lady neighbor who's babysitter for the kids. All right, and so there's a piece of that you left out.
Yeah.
Or you cut out.
Happiest day of her life when she was a young woman and just married. And I worked so hard on that piece. I probably worked 2 weeks on that piece. Liked it so much, and just got this sinking feeling a year or so later, this just doesn't work here.
So this is
Gotta
4
go.
or 5 pages of backstory on this important, but not the most major character, and you said, it's got to go.
Yeah. It just felt like the book slowed down more at that moment than I wanted it to slow, and so I cut that, and I cut lots of stuff in that last 6 months of the book.
Well, along those lines, in dealing with how you work, I think lots of folks who read the new book, Nightwoods, will have the same experience I did, that we get caught up in the driving force of who's going to get killed and who's going to get caught, of the normal mystery part of it. And then going back to, that we skip over some of the descriptive language, which is sort of your greatest work. All of which, that was meant as a compliment, but it's getting to a question, which is, when you write these luscious descriptions of the surroundings and the geography and the feelings that people have, or do these just gush out of you and you leave them like they are?
No, nothing gushes. Nothing ever gushes for me as a writer. It's a real building process of trying to understand the character and then trying to finding the way into the character, whether it's through what they love in the external world and trying to show that connection, because Luce sees the natural world as this compensation for the difficulties of life. And so it's finding for all the characters the thing that connects them most to the world, and that takes me a long time. A good day of writing for me is a really good day is 2 pages. An acceptable day is a paragraph.
When you finish that section, the paragraph or the 2 pages after that long period, do those pages tend to stay the same, or are they subject to? How do you order your original writing and revision? Just as you get to it, or do you finish it and then go back and?
And I don't write in sequence. I may have written something in the last third of the book in the first year of the book. I'm all over the place. I've told editors when they want to see something early, I just am not going to show it to you because it's too scary looking. You'll get nervous if you see how scattered it is right now. Those first 2 years, it's very scattered, and the work of the second couple of years is trying to find trying to fit the parts together with tight seams.
Well, we've just got a minute left, and people, you're never going to escape Cold Mountain because people loved it so much. And I wonder, in a word or two, is the success of Cold Mountain, as wonderful as it was, is it a little bit of a burden to you as you work on your new projects?
I think you just have to accept that that's the book that, whether I write 1 more book or 10 more books, that's probably the one that people are going to come up to me and say, I love that book. But otherwise, you just write the 1 book and quit. So,
For those great fans of Cold Mountain, with its epic and 13 Moons, which are epics. Are those folks going to like the new Charles Frazier's book?
I don't know. I mean, the writing is my writing. It's, you know, the style is what I'm the most interested in, and that's there. We'll see. I mean, we'll see.
Well, this fan of Cold Mountain really liked the new book and the new style and it's not new style. It's wrong. Like the shortness of it and the brevity of it and the tightness of it. I think it's a great book, and I thank you for taking time to talk to us about it.
Thank you.
Thanks to Charles Frazier, the author of Nightwoods. Thanks to you for joining us here in the Inman Chapel in the mountains of North Carolina for a conversation with North Carolina's probably most famous writer. Thanks. Join us next time, same time, and I'll introduce you to another great North Carolina writer.
Funding for North Carolina Bookwatch is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC TV, and by the North Carolina Humanities Council.